and comes to us from the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville.
Good evening and welcome to the Arkansas Debates. We'd like to thank the University of Arkansas here at Fayetteville, and we also like to thank C-SPAN tonight for allowing us to broadcast this debate nationwide. Before we get started and before we meet the panelists and the candidates, I'd like to go over the rules with you. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for opening and closing remarks. A coin toss decided the order of those remarks earlier. The candidates will also be questioned by a panel of journalists. The candidate answering the question will have 1 minute and 30 seconds to respond. The other candidate will have 1 minute for rebuttal. Now, we've asked the audience to please hold all of its applause until the end of the debate so that we can hear from the candidates as much as possible. Thank you for being with us, and now we'll meet the candidates and our panelists. Debating tonight, Governor Bill Clinton, the Democratic candidate for governor. Also, Sheffield Nelson, the Republican candidate for governor. And our panel of journalists, Bill Simmons with the Associated Press is with us tonight, Regina Blakely of KATV, Craig Cannon of KHBS and KHOG-TV, A Plurvis West of the Black Students Association, and Steve Wilkes of the Arkansas Traveler. Bill Simmons has the first, Governor Clinton and Mr. Nelson will make opening remarks to begin tonight. Mr. Clinton has been chosen to make the first opening remarks.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here on the campus of the oldest land-grant university west of the Mississippi River, a place where I taught happily for 3 years, to explain why I'd like to be governor for the next 4. We have to build on the achievements of Arkansas in the 1980s, a decade that was very hard on the rural South, indeed on all of rural America, where we fought against the tide to enjoy the largest job growth rate of all the surrounding states over the last 4 years, and nationally recognized improvements in our schools, including the highest high school graduation rate in the South and a 20% increase in the college-going rate. In the 90s, we need to do more in education, preschool for all children who need it, expanded school health services to fight teen pregnancy and other child health problems, apprenticeship programs for non-college bound students. We need to make it easier for middle-class people to send their children to college through the College Savings Bond program and other initiatives. We need more programs for small and minority business development and technology business development, especially in the depressed areas of our state. We need a road program to help Northwest Arkansas manage its growth and to spark growth in the rest of the state. We need a recycling program for solid waste, a reduction in water pollution from animal waste, and boot camps for first-time offenders. Since the last debate, the differences between me and my opponent have become more sharply defined, especially in the crucial area of education. He's criticized the performance of our preschool program, HIPPY, and I want to expand it. He said our young people who aren't going to college but are going to be farmers or mechanics shouldn't have to take the courses that all students now have to take to get out of high school. I believe they should. He's against the College Bond program, which would bring $19.5 million to this campus alone, and I'm for it. And he's continued to insist that Lincoln High School is counseling abortion, even though the principal told him it wasn't so. I hope that we can expose these charges and focus on the real opportunities facing Arkansas in the 90s in this debate tonight. Thank you.
Mr. Nelson.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to be here tonight also. I appreciate the opportunity to come back to the University of Arkansas here in Fayetteville and have this debate with Governor Clinton. You know, I find it very interesting that he talks about things that have been done here in Arkansas, but what he doesn't talk about is his record. And what I would like to talk about tonight is his record of 10 years versus my record of 12 years at ARCLA. In 10 years, he has led us down the primrose path to the point that we're almost last in most major comparisons with other states. He has been a hands-off governor. He has left the state 128 days one year, 130 days another. He has paid more attention to his national ambitions than he has to running the state of Arkansas, and we've suffered because of it. You and I have been the carriers of his political ambitions on our backs through his taxes for the 10 years that he's been in office. My 12 years at ARCLA were different from that. I took a company that was $250 million in size and considered one of the worst companies in the country in terms of natural gas, both supplies and what we were doing as a company. I turned it into a $1.3 billion company that was considered one of the best of its kind in the country. And looking at programs that could be compared, he had a program for early out that cost this state millions and millions of dollars, and he hired people back, having more employees than in history in state employment. At ARCLA, I reduced our rolls by 500 people during my tenure and also helped Mac McClarty make determinations that led to 500 more leaving shortly after I left the company. My position is that I ran ARCLA well for 12 years, and I'm more than interested in stacking that up against Bill Clinton's 10 years as governor. I think that what we've got to weigh is, has he done what has been fair for the people of the state of Arkansas? And what I ask you to do is listen tonight and you make that determination. I think he has not, and I think that 10 years is enough, and it's time for a change.
Thank you for the opening remarks. Now, Bill Simmons will have the first question for Mr. Clinton.
Governor, the first question involves black minority interests and economic development. About 10 years ago, you established a state government program aimed at providing black minority businesses with about 10% of the state's contract business for supplies and services. It's never come anywhere near achieving the 10% goal. The question has two parts. Why has it failed, and what can be done to raise minority involvement in business?
Well, first of all, I don't think that you can say it failed in that we're doing much more business with minority business people than we were before. We could never have reached the 10% goal because there was never a year in which black businesses submitted even 10% of the bids, assuming they'd gotten 100% of the bids that they presented. What we have done through the Highway Department is to set up a bond guarantee program which has led to millions and millions of dollars worth of minority business contracts. We've set aside some contracts which can only be bid on by minority businesses in the Highway Department, and we're now looking at establishing the same sort of bond guarantee program for non-highway contracts in state employment. As we do that, I think you will see a substantial increase in those contracts as well. If you look at that, plus the fact that we have financed a number of black manufacturers and other black businesses for the first time in our state through the AIDC, through the Development Finance Authority, I think you will see that the commitment of this administration is strong. The truth is we did not have the infrastructure available at the time the 10% goal was established to get anywhere close to that. We never had bids which exceeded 2% to the best of my memory. You said you're looking at that option, a bond guarantee in other state contracts. Yes. When will you make a decision? Well, if we can devise one that works, we'll do it. We're definitely going to do this. That's one of the things we're committed to doing. When will you make a decision? As well as, well, I've already made the decision to do it unless it's not feasible to do. That's one of the things that I told the Minority Enterprise Program about 2 weeks ago that we would do, along with establishing a $2 million fund for small and minority business finance.
Mr. Nelson.
Well, this is typical of Bill's promises. He made this promise 2 weeks ago, which is 5 weeks away from the election. In reality, he's never even reached 2% in his goal of 10% for minority businesses. Secondly, when I was chairman of the AIDC, I think we had $2 million set aside for minorities. It was never used in any way. I thirdly would point out that when I was at ARCLA, I started a fair share plan through NAACP, and ARCLA did purchase a significant amount of goods and services from minorities, and it has increased greatly through the years. So I think what we see is an election year promise that will fall to the wayside, much as this 10% did through the years.
Mr. Nelson, the question was why did it fail, and what would you do, what should be done to increase minority involvement?
Well, I think it failed because he didn't do anything but make an election year promise, Bill. I think that the fact of the matter is that he did not make the effort. It was all a promise that was not followed up by action.
And what should be done? If you're elected, what will you do?
First thing you need to do is strengthen the minority area of the AIDC. You have a token representation there in terms of what they're going after in terms of helping minorities. I think you've got to make a determined effort if, in fact, you're going to help the minority businessmen in the state of Arkansas.
Regina Blakely has the next question for Mr. Nelson.
Mr. Nelson, you're against providing family planning services and contraceptives in school-based health clinics. Well, at the same time, you call for limiting assistance to mothers having more than a certain number of illegitimate children, even saying those mothers should be penalized for having those children. Aren't you penalizing them without educating them?
I don't think you're penalizing at all. What I think, first of all, that the legislature has turned down the idea of having the issuance of contraceptives, the dispensing of pregnancy and abortion counseling through high schools, with the exception of 5 or 6 in this state. Number two, I think that when you talk in terms of whether you're encouraging or discouraging, I'm talking about the financial discouragement. I think you should set a limit of 2 or 3 children that you will provide the financial backing for, but at the present time, the federal rule allows for 9, and I think that any of us would say that's well beyond the realm of reason.
But isn't it only about $40 a child?
As you well know, Regina, it goes a lot higher than that. You're talking about in a cash amount per child, but there are many more things that go with it, including food stamps and other subsistence-type payments. I think that they are not incompatible at all, and I think we're really comparing apples and oranges when you try to talk about a school program versus what happens to people after they finished high school.
Mr. Clinton.
It is amazing to me that Mr. Nelson would suggest these people are getting rich on welfare when just a week or so ago he said that with $9.5 million net worth, he wasn't a rich person by Arkansas standards. The truth is, Mr. Nelson has demagogued these school health clinics, which just 2 years ago, before he became a Republican and a candidate for governor, he said we're doing a good job. The school health clinics have not been prohibited by the legislature from doing anything. The services they offer are up to the local school board and community leaders, and they're very important in fighting teen pregnancy. I'm for them, he's against them. It's a clear issue in the governor's race, and I hope the people will support me. With regard to welfare reform, I've done a lot more to get people off welfare than Mr. Nelson ever has. I helped to write the national legislation that is now moving over 200 people a month from welfare to work in this state, and I think we should continue to implement it. I think it's a terrible problem when people have too many children, but you don't want to punish the children. What you want to do is to get people off welfare and into the workforce. That's what we're doing in Arkansas.
Craig Cannon has the next question for Governor Clinton.
Governor, thanks to C-SPAN carrying this debate nationwide, it leads me to the following observation and this question. The state of Arkansas has a negative image problem, both perceived and real. Contrary to your opening statements, we rank at the bottom of many state comparison lists and categories. You know the problems of per capita income, teacher pay, etc. We have one of the highest teenage pregnancy rates, and the list goes on. Governor, you've been in charge now 10 years. Isn't 10 years long enough to get this turned around?
Well, sir, it took 154 years to develop. Let me ask you this. It's not so easy to change 2.4 million people at a time when these Republicans have just clapped, abandoned our state for the last 10 years. Look what happened. Look what happened. They broke the rules. Now let's talk about it. Look what happened in the last 10 years, my fellow Arkansans. Every rural area of America lost ground in per capita income, every one. This part of America hurt worse than any. And what was the answer of the national government? You do more with less. We moved into a world economy which punished rural states, agricultural areas, small towns, industrial areas. And while we were trying to reinvest in our education and our economic development, Mr. Nelson here got his $9.5 million by raising gas rates between 335 and 600%, much more than taxes went up in the last decade I served. So nobody helped us get there. That's how he made that money. That's why they said he was doing a good job. He soaked the rates up. Now, we have made improvements in education. We've made improvements in economic development. We can't help it if we didn't get much help. We showed dramatic advances in job growth and educational advancement. If you want to do better, you will continue this. If you want to do worse, you'll implement the Nelson program. The Nelson program is promise them everything at election time and don't spend a nickel to see the cow jump over the moon.
Mr. Nelson, your response.
Of course, Mr. Clinton knows that that's not a factual presentation because he knows that the natural gas prices increased because of what happened nationally. It had nothing to do with what ARCLA did because I had only 2 rate increases for residential customers during my 12 years. I think more importantly, if you start talking about the image that we have here in Arkansas, you've got to go back to the Atlanta speech that Bill Clinton made and then the Johnny Carson performance that Clinton made. And then if you really want to go to the base of it, go to the bumper sticker that Johnny Carson showed on his program that said, if you can read this, you're not from Arkansas. Now, if he thinks that we don't have an image problem, he's wrong. If he'd stay home and work on taking care of Arkansas, we wouldn't have such a problem because we would move up in standings.
I want to take this moment to remind the audience to please try to hold your applause throughout the debate so we'll have as much time as possible for the candidates. We go next to...
Could I ask a question? Was the question answered? I thought the question was, isn't 10 years long enough?
Would anybody like to respond to that?
I don't believe that any governor in America could have done more than I have done or worked harder than I have worked in this state in the last 8 years since I took office in 1983. I believe that we have proved that we can grow jobs faster than the national average, and objective observers who look outside and see how does a state that's 48th in per capita income, that's 46th in state and local tax burden, do what we do. They marvel at it. We do not have a negative image. Look at Charles Venus's article that he wrote the other day in that business publication. Most people who come here from out of state to look at us and see us like us a lot. And I'll tell you something else. I think I did this state a lot of good on the Johnny Carson Show, and Sheffield will never have to worry about being on it.
Okay.
You know, Mr. Clinton is exactly right. I wouldn't have to worry about being on because I'd stay here in the state of Arkansas and do the things this state needs to grow. And the reason jobs grew at such a dramatic level, what Bill doesn't tell you, when you're dealing with smaller numbers compared to surrounding states, it's easier to show a bigger percentage of increase. I happened to be vice chairman one year and chairman 2 of those 4 years that he's talking about of doing so well.
Okay.
I would go one step further. I do believe that 10 years is enough. 14 years is entirely too long, and it's time for a change, and I believe the people of Arkansas believe that.
Okay. I want to get back to the format now. Let's go to a Pluribus West for the next question. And he has the next question for Mr. Nelson, I believe.
Mr. Nelson, there has been much debate on the education system and proposals to make it better. My question to you is, what is your proposal on funding the educational system, and what, if elected governor, will you do to fund our education system and make it rank with the other states?
First of all, we've got to look at what's been done. We have taxed our people to the point that they're on their knees, not only from a state tax standpoint where we rank 15th in the country, but also from a local, county, and city standpoint where they are paying for the school standards that the governor has instituted. I would say that what we need to do, though, is back up and regroup. We need to use the $100 million plus of annual growth that this state has. We need to cut the fat out of state government that does exist. We need to cut the excess employees off of the state rolls by attrition only, not add the thousands that Bill Clinton's added over the past 6 or 8 years. And I believe if we do that, we'll have substantial dollars to put into education. Lastly, it's all a matter of prioritization. I think that if we will set our priorities right, we will be able to put the money into education that we've got to put and to enable to do the job that needs to be done for Arkansans.
Mr. Clinton.
Once again, every time Mr. Nelson has said this, a reporter who could do it's asked a follow-up question. He said, where? Where will you cut the employees? Where will you save? He says, well, I'm going to appoint a business committee and they'll tell me how to do that later. Well, later and later and later will be too late in the first year or the second year. He pointed out tonight, trying to slide over it, that after he left ARCLA, his successor reduced employment by 500 people. They could run the company on 500 fewer than he needed to run it. And now he's going to apply that to the state government and make all the problems go away because we have so much robust economic growth thanks to my economic policies. Well, I hope it will work that way. And I've instituted a quality management program to control costs, which has already resulted in millions of dollars of savings in state government. The only difference between me and him is that he is promising the moon without knowing whether he can deliver it. And I think the people can see through it. That's why 90% of the educators in this state are supporting me, because they know his promise is hollow, hollow, hollow.
Of course, Mr. Clinton's position is 90% of the educators are supporting him.
Now, wait a minute.
Mr. Nelson, wait a minute. We're going to stay with the format as much as possible if we can. So
Is
let's
it my
have.
time?
No, not yet. That was Mr. Clinton's rebuttal to your question. We've got another question that's coming up. Mr. Wilkes, a question for Bill Clinton.
Governor Clinton, currently Arkansas ranks 50th in salaries paid to teachers among the 50 states in the District of Columbia. The Arkansas Education Association has approved a plan to raise teachers' salaries an average of $7,135, bringing the average salary from $22,000 to a little over $29,000. Do you support this plan, and is it a reasonable and attainable goal by the 1992-93 school year?
I don't believe we can raise teacher salaries $7,000 in 2 years. If you look at $7,000 at the cost of that at about $53 million per $1,000, that is a huge amount of money. It couldn't be done without a massive tax increase. I do believe we can raise salaries quite a lot without that level of tax increase. Now, let's look at what Mr. Nelson says. He's promised to take the teachers out of 50th place by cutting the fat out of state government. The Advisory Council on Intergovernmental Relations says that we're 48th in per capita income, 49th in per capita tax receipts, and 46th in the percentage of our people's income we take in state and local taxes. How is he going to do that since we have the 15th largest teacher payroll compared to students in the country? He's not. I'm going to do the best I can to raise teacher pay, and it's more likely that I'll do it than that he will. That's why the AEA endorsed me, and that's why so many school administrators are for me. They know that he has demagogued this issue just like he has every other issue in this election. He's not for anything. He's just trying to badmouth me.
Could I ask a clarifier? 7,000 is out of reach, you say. What is your numerical goal?
Well, let me give you an example. If it depends on
just a dollar
figure. I have to give you it depends on several intangibles. Number one, what's our revenue growth? Number two, what kind of orders will we get from the federal or state courts? Number three, what kind of orders will we get from the Democratic Congress and the Republican president? Mr. Simmons, as you well know, we could have raised teacher pay $1,500 a year last year without any kind of tax increase had it not been for those things that were beyond our control. So I'm going to do the very best I can once I see what the final revenue estimate is, what the orders we get from the federal and state courts are and the Congress, and what other options we have for funding.
Realizing there's certain intangibles we don't know yet, what is your goal?
Well, the last time I set a goal on minority purchasing, you tried to hoist me on my own petard, even though I increased minority purchase for the state of Arkansas. I'm going to raise teacher pay as much as I can, and I will not be satisfied until our teacher pay ranking is above our per capita income and until we rank high in the ratio of our teacher salaries to our per capita income. That is really the fair measure. You know, we rank 35th in the country in the ratio of our teacher pay to our income. I think we should be higher.
Let me say that when we have follow-up questions from the panelists like this, I will be giving the candidates some extra time to go over their time limit. Mr. Nelson, it is now your time to respond to that.
First of all, I apologize for trying to answer a minute ago out of turn. I guess I just watched Bill. I do not feel that you can set a specific amount that you would try to increase teacher pay. I think it'd be an error to do that, and that's one of the reasons that the AEA would not endorse me. I do believe that what you can do is set yourself a goal, and that would be to work toward the regional average. I think that you've got to be reasonable and realistic, and I know that's going to take a long time. But I do believe that for Bill to stand up here and try to imply that he's not thinking of a massive tax increase, he's not being fair to the people of the state of Arkansas, because that is the only way that he can be talking in terms that they would have been satisfied with what he had to say to the point that they would have recommended him.
Bill Simmons for Mr. Clinton.
I believe it's for Mr. Nelson.
Mr. Nelson, I'm sorry.
Mr. Nelson, all the polls indicate that in 3 weeks from now, the people of Arkansas are going to elect Bill Clinton again. Do you believe the polls are correct? If not, why not? If so, how are you going to change them in the last 3 weeks?
I do think that the most recent poll was fairly accurate. It showed me behind by 12 points, down 50 to 38. For a sitting governor to be at 50%, I think that Bill Clinton and others would tell you that is not a safe position to be in. I'd also remind you that Frank White was behind by 16 points on October the 28th, 1980. I do think that I will catch Bill Clinton, and I think that I'm right on schedule to do it.
Mr. Clinton?
I think that the voters will vote for me and against Mr. Nelson because of our positions on the issues, and because he has run a campaign devoid of principle or conviction. He has not only sacrificed his political party, which is understandable if that's a matter of conviction, but also his philosophy. He spent the entire 1980s criticizing me for not raising taxes more. In 1985, he said I should have raised the sales tax 2 cents instead of 1 cent. In 1987, he said I should raise taxes even more for education. That's before he became a born-again Republican and wanted so desperately to be governor. He's changed his position on consolidation, on the school standards, on any number of other issues, just to get votes. And the people know it. They can sense it. I got a real taste of what kind of campaign Mr. Nelson would run when he told me if I appointed him to the AIDC, he'd go all over the country looking for new industry, and after I gave him the job, he didn't take a single trip. He spent all of his time making speeches in Arkansas, promoting himself for governor. The voters have figured that out, and they're going to vote that way on Election Day.
Regina Blakely for Mr. Clinton.
Governor Clinton, if re-elected governor, what will be the one specific, I'm saying that so no one else will jump in here, one specific piece of legislation you will put it all on the line for, really fight for with the legislature? And if it requires funding, where will those revenues come from?
Well, the things that I believe need to be done in education, and I believe education has to be the focus of the next legislative session, even though, to be sure, there are things that have to be done in rural health care and transportation and economic development. But the things that really need to be done are not particularly costly. An education package that would provide preschool to all children who need it, expanded school health services to deal with the terrible problems that children have in schools. We have so many with infected ears or teeth or gums and never see a doctor. Dealing with these things are not costly. The apprenticeship program, which I would start as a pilot program in 10 or 12 sites to train young people who aren't going on to college to get good paying jobs, that would not be costly. The college bond program will be funded from interest earnings that the state is going to get anyway. So the education package will not be that costly. I want to see a more aggressive use of the school choice program and a lot of other initiatives in education, including a report card for every school, every year, for every parent. Those things will not cost a lot of money, but the educational efforts will be the focus of the next legislative session for me.
Mr. Nelson.
The first bill that I would introduce would be one to limit any governor to 2 successive 4-year terms. Secondly, I would concentrate on education issues as well as economic development issues. I think that we need to look very strongly at having a Delta strategy for industrial development. I think we also need to look at our standards, revisit our standards, and see if we need to fine-tune them. You know, Bill Clinton gets upset when you talk about his standards, but the standards are not producing what we need out of education. What I will do is take a very close look at what they are doing and what they are not doing. Look at where inordinate costs are and see what we need to do to fine-tune or change as necessary. I do believe, though, that the restriction to 2 4-year terms would be a very important piece of legislation that I personally would put myself behind to take to the people and let them vote on it.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yes, you may.
How can a bill, since the Constitution sets no limit on the number of terms a governor may have, how could you limit him by statutory legislation?
No, Bill, my point, I said I would get it through the legislature to take it to the people at the next general election. That's what I said.
A resolution.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
I said that in my last statement.
Okay, Craig Cannon now has a question for Mr. Nelson.
Yes. It's got to be tough when it comes to funding. I mean, we've had so much talk already about how would you pay for this and pay for that. But I got to ask you about highway funding. It's a major issue in our state. We need to improve our roads, as you well know. A simple question, Sheffield, Mr. Nelson, will you support the toll idea as a way to speed up construction, if that would do that? And quickly, also, the poor folks in Bella Vista, anything to do about this 6-mile stretch that to get them a bypass with that interstate plan? How do you stand on that?
First of all, I would look at toll roads as a last resort, but I think that the people of West Arkansas and Northwest Arkansas have put up an inordinate amount of money toward the construction of highways in other parts of the state. Therefore, I'd prefer for those highways to be paid for out of normal highway funds. I personally would prefer a 5-cent gasoline tax if and when we can afford it. In other words, if the Middle East crisis continues and gasoline prices remain high, I would not support one. I would not be in favor of a 30-year bond issue the way Governor Clinton is, because I think he's willing to mortgage the future, just as Michael Dukakis has in Massachusetts. I am not for that and will not be for it. Lastly, I would favor bypassing Bella Vista because I do think that it would be relatively inexpensive, it would be feasible. They have been promised it by both the governor and by Bobby Harper, and it has not taken place.
Mr. Clinton?
Well, Mr. Nelson has once again promised something that he can't deliver. If you pass a 5-cent gas tax, and that's all you do, and you want to build 4-lane roads in every part of the state, which will have to be promised in order to pass the 5-cent gas tax with 75% of both houses, you will not see the road building we need in Northwest Arkansas in the next 10 years. You may see it over 20 years if he does that, but you won't see it in the next 10 years. That's why I favor a highway bond issue, and I favor the toll roads if local people support it. I think there's much more support for the toll road here in Northwest Arkansas, for the Highway 412 segment, and for 71 if necessary, than there is in other parts of the state. If the people here support it, I think we ought to give it to them. We're going to choke off growth in Northwest Arkansas if we wait 15 or 20 years to finish this road project. We cannot afford to do it, and I believe that people should be given a chance to do it without soaking the working people who drive from Madison County to the Campbell Soup Factory here every day to work with a huge gas tax increase. You can do it less expensively with bonds, and most states do it. We're the 4th lowest state in the country in bonded indebtedness. It will not be a problem for us.
And quickly, can the governor's office help in this problem with Bella Vista?
Oh, yes,
Are you
absolutely.
helping?
And I believe that there needs to be a public hearing up there, and if there's support for that, I think the road should be rerouted.
I disagree with Mr. Clinton that you can't pay for it by increased revenues due to a 5-cent gasoline tax. It's $75 million
I think Mr. Nelson's answering a second time.
Aren't I entitled
Are we
to answer too, since he could?
to the Bella Vista question? Yes.
Only Bella Vista?
Yes.
Okay, I've already said I would bypass Bella Vista. I think it can be done. I think it's reasonable, and I think the people up there both want it and deserve it.
Okay. Mr. West, a question for Mr. Clinton.
Governor Clinton, on a more general note, if elected to another term as governor, what specific issues will you focus on, and what major areas of focus will you try to make work for your next term as governor?
Well, as I said before, I intend to support a comprehensive education program. I intend to support an aggressive effort to implement the recommendations of the Delta Development Commission, which was created by Senator Bumpers and Congressman Espy in Mississippi, and which gives us a roadmap to the future. We're making a beginning over there already with the Delta Cultural Center, which will be dedicated in the next few days, with the new housing initiative in Helena, with the new Nucor steel mill in Mississippi County, with a number of other initiatives. I will support expanded health services to children, the Elder Choices program to allow more of our senior citizens to stay out of nursing homes and stay at home, and new programs in the area of the environment, especially a statewide recycling program, and a program to reduce animal waste, water pollution. And finally, I strongly believe we need to try some new approaches in the area of crime and drugs. We need to provide treatment on demand without delay for all of our people, especially adolescents, and we need boot camps for first-time nonviolent offenders. We also need to give every county the option to keep first-time nonviolent offenders in the county and have them work there, cleaning up the streets and the roads and the parks, building city parks and doing other things, instead of sending the taxpayers' money down at the state penitentiary. These are some of the things that I would like to do in the next 4 years. I think there should be a special emphasis on economic development in the depressed areas of the state and for minority businesses, and I've already outlined a program to achieve that.
Mr. Nelson, your response.
I think that we've got to concentrate on education and economic development because I think they are what will drive us into the 1990s. It is my opinion that we need to look at vocational technical education and get it out from under the Department of Education, which is your kindergarten through 12th grade board. We need to make our VOTEC offerings more technical and more sophisticated. I also think that we need to go after jobs on the basis of where they're most needed. You've had a tremendous outflow of people from the Delta. A lot of that's because they don't have jobs. Social programs are good in some ways, but social programs can also be a deterrent. I feel that when you look at East Arkansas, the best social program would be a good job. I truly believe that a Delta strategy could do something over there, and I don't think that the commission that Bill Clinton headed has done anything except tell us that we've got more in terms of teenage pregnancy, we've got more in terms of lack of educated people, we've got all our problems that we've always known existed. I grew up in the Delta and could have told you those. I think that we are not taking the approach that we need to solve them.
Okay, Steve Wilkes for Mr. Nelson.
Mr. Nelson, the College Savings Bond Act would provide about $27 million for Arkansas's colleges and universities for construction, renovation, for maintenance, for the purchase of library books. You have said you are opposed to the measure in that it will mortgage the state's future after the money has been spent for a quick fix. Could you explain how the state will find its future mortgaged, and if so, why that's so bad, since the education of our children has a great deal to do with our future prosperity? Also, with the desperate condition of some of our buildings, isn't a quick fix what we need?
In theory, it always sounds good to have a quick fix. That's, again, exactly what Dukakis did to Massachusetts, and that's part of the miracle that's gone awry up there. If you keep doing the things that Bill Clinton has proposed, such as a highway bond issue and an education bond issue, you're going into the future and mortgaging that future. From the standpoint of this bond issue, I think your real problem is that you can amortize only $93 million with an $8 million a year payment. But you leave yourself $207 million that can be zero coupon bonds that can be issued and that we would have to pay off as they came due. In other words, out into the future. The people of the state of Arkansas would have to pay for them. Lastly, there are no guarantees of what this money would be used for, and though they've taken a stand, it does not have to be what they actually do as a matter of finality. They could build stadiums, they could do other things, and I think it's wrong to rob from Peter to pay Paul. I think it's wrong to mortgage the future, and I personally am for paying for things as you can afford them.
Mr. Clinton?
We are not mortgaging the future with this proposal. We are forfeiting the present if we don't do more of this. All of our major competitors have highway bond issues and other kinds of bond issues. Very few people in this country today can afford to write a check to move into a new home or write a check to buy a new car. They pay it out of their income as they go along, and they get a good investment and a good return. That's what nearly every state in the country is doing with its roads, but not Arkansas. That's why our competitors are beating us to the punch on all sides with toll roads and bond issues and other things, and why we're going to be left in the dust if we don't look at bonded financing. This college bond program will not even be paid out of general revenues. It will be paid out of the interest earnings of the state. It will enable us to build a chemistry building here now instead of waiting another 5 or 6 years for it. What is that worth? I think it's worth a lot. The truth is that this is just another example of short-term demagoguery by Mr. Nelson. He knows this has nothing to do with Massachusetts and everything to do with Arkansas's future. He's willing to sacrifice it just for a few votes.
Bill Simmons for Mr. Clinton.
I'd like to get a summary from each of you of the Clinton years as governor, with pluses and minuses. That's the question.
What would you say?
Pluses and minuses of the Clinton years as governor.
I think the pluses were a dramatic increase in the emphasis on education, the building of a comprehensive, broad-based economic development program which resulted in the highest job growth rate of all the states around us over the last 4 years, a real emphasis on child health which reduced infant mortality by 40%, increased early screenings for children, increased the participation of pregnant women and children in our women, infant, and children's programs. We've gone from 53 to 81% of our streams which are swimmable. The EPA says we have the cleanest air in the country. We've closed 309 of 314 illegal dumps which were opened when I became governor. We've had a broad-based assault on the problems of our people, and we've established a roadmap for the future. The Delta Commission, contrary to what Mr. Nelson says, is not a study. If you open it, it's a handbook. It says specifically what you're supposed to do. He hasn't read it, which is why he's making an uninformed comment about it. Now, there are some minuses. I haven't been able all by myself to overcome the international economic trends that swept through all of rural America and caused it to lose ground relative to the national average in income, because we weren't as well educated as the country and because our economy was rooted in agriculture and low-wage, low-skill industry. But we've begun the process and we're moving in the right direction. I think the worst thing we could do is to change direction. What we need to do is to rededicate our efforts to do what we know will work in the 1990s when conditions will be more favorable than they were in the 80s for states like Arkansas.
Governor, you acknowledged there were minuses, but you didn't name any of them.
I did. One minus is I wanted to raise per capita income, and I was not able to do it. I wanted to raise more money for education, and Mr. Nelson did too until he became a Republican and wanted to run for governor. May want to run for president too. Wouldn't be the first commitment that he changed.
Mr. Nelson, your response.
There are lots of things I wanted to do. All you have to do is to look at all the things that I asked for that we didn't do. But the most fundamental thing is I had hoped that within the years I had, we would be as well educated as the rest of the country and that our people would support competitive investments in education and economic development. But the 80s were too tough on us, and we were too victimized by our abandonment by the national government.
Thank you.
Mr. Nelson, your response.
Well, I'd say from a plus standpoint, we've got to give Bill some credit for what was done in education and has been done, though there's still a lot to be done. Secondly, I'd say that his selection of me to head the AIDC may have helped him because he had 3 out of 4 years that were very good. And then I'm going to go to the negatives. He has led us to the bottom of the heap in many important areas, including per capita income, including teachers' pay, including all the other areas that you compare nationally, which have led us to be ranked one of the 10 worst managed states in the country. I think that what we've got to look at is that you've got a tax situation here in this state that is out of control. He has doubled a budget. He had $1 billion or less when he was first governor. He now has in excess of $2 billion, yet every time we have a session, he cries for more taxes. I think that the real negatives have been that he's led us to the bottom of everything in the country, and he's taxed us to death in the process.
Regina for Mr. Nelson.
Mr. Nelson, George Bush said, no new taxes. Sheffield Nelson says, no new taxes. But we talk about things you want to do, increasing teachers' salaries, establishing a road program, establishing a health program, improving rural health, and you also talk about insuring the poor and the high risk. Now, realistically, streamlining government and using natural growth is only going to go so far. So if the revenue falls short from your projections, which promise has priority? No new taxes or no new programs?
Regina, I think that President Bush has a totally different situation on his hands compared to the state of Arkansas. He has a $2 trillion deficit that he's got to contend with. He has a war in the Middle East, or the equivalent of a war. Here in the state of Arkansas, you have a constitutional requirement that you live within your means. I feel that you can take the normal growth here in the state of Arkansas, which is in excess of $100 million a year. I think you can cut fat out of state government, and I think that you can cut red tape out of state government that will result in a tremendous amount of savings to use the way they need to be used. I do not see the need to vary from what I'm saying I will do, and I feel so strong about it that I am committed to veto any tax bill that comes to my desk if I'm elected governor in a 4-year period of time.
No teacher salaries and no roads and no health care.
There will be teacher salaries increases if I become governor of the state of Arkansas. I will not promise an amount, and I think the bill has again held out the carrot, just like he did to us when he held out the carrot on the 1-cent sales tax increase back in 1983. I do believe that you can do everything else that needs to be done in this state with revenues that are coming in, and I'm committed to doing that.
Mr. Clinton?
One of the things that's really held this state back over the years is politicians who told people repeatedly they could get something for nothing. Something for nothing. There's always an easy way out. If Mr. Nelson gets rid of 1,000 state employees, that's $20 million savings. That amounts to about $380 a teacher. That won't even come close to taking us out of last place, even with the ordinary growth you get from inflation. So the truth is that he is more than willing to have nothing happen in the next 4 years if he can have the job for the next 4 years. He doesn't know what he wants to do with the job, he just knows that he wants it. And he'll change his position on anything. I will remind you that this man who says no new taxes criticized me for not raising the sales tax 2 cents instead of 1 cent in '85, said we had to have even bigger tax increases in '87. He's always wanted to spend more money, except when he became a Republican, wanted to run for governor, thought it would make votes. George Bush couldn't keep his word, and he meant it when he said it.
Craig Cannon now. Craig Cannon for Mr. Clinton.
Well, we're talking about the next 4 years. Governor Clinton, here on statewide TV, in fact, national television, will you guarantee all of us that if reelected, there's absolutely, positively no way that you'll run for any other political office and that you'll serve your term out in full?
You bet. I told you when I announced for governor, I intended to run, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to serve 4 years. I made that decision when I decided to run. If you listen to all these political columnists, they'll tell you that no one much outside of Arkansas believes that I could do anything else. When I decided to run for governor, I decided to serve for 4 years as governor. I do think it's sort of sad that Sheffield Nelson, who said in 1985 he thought I'd make a good president, now thinks it's a bad thing when anybody from Arkansas that he's running against is considered. But I'm not being considered. I'm being considered as a candidate for governor. That's a job I want. That's a job I'll do for the next 4 years.
Mr. Nelson, do you have a response to that?
Yes, I do. First of all, in 1986, Mr. Clinton said if we would elect him, he would stay home and run state government. He said he would not try to raise state taxes. He turned around immediately and set out to try to run for national office himself, and when that failed, he tried to help his good friend Michael Dukakis. He was gone from this state 128 days one year, 130 the other. Then in 1988, he said he most likely would not run again. In 1986, he said he most likely would not run again. That would be his last term. And then later, in '88, he said he might run again just to give himself the opportunity to run for president in 1996. So I think that Bill Clinton, too, has changed. I think that we have seen a vast change.
Purvis West for Mr. Nelson.
Mr. Nelson, Governor Clinton has a substantial number of minority representatives in his administration, but not necessarily in the infrastructure. If elected governor, what kind of representation would you have in your administration, particularly in the black community?
I think to look at what I do as governor, you have to look at what I've done through the years. At ArcLaw, when I moved into the presidency of that company, we were under a threat from the federal courts regarding how our black employees have been treated. I immediately set about to cure that problem and move minorities through the company to the point that we have officers, or had officers when I left the company. We had board members in every board position. We had people at Chamber of Commerce when I was president there. I fully integrated that board. I feel that the people looking at what I would do as a governor could look back at my past and see that I'd be very fair to minorities, would move them into positions, and would give them an opportunity to advance. And I think that's all they ask.
Could you be a little more specific and give us some numbers or percentages as far as the number of blacks that you would, try to work into your administration?
Well, I don't think you go on a numbers basis. I think you go for the best qualified people, whether they be black or white. I don't think you play numbers games except to have reasonable percentages of minorities represented in state government. In terms of numbers of department heads and numbers of people within the government itself, I think you go on a basis of fairness and equal opportunity and let the best move to the top. And I think you'd find minorities there among those tops.
Well, could I ask a follow-up?
Yes.
Would you start with an assumption that since blacks make up 16 to 17% of the population in this state, you can find qualified blacks to take up 16 to 17% of the state government positions from top to bottom?
I think that would be a fair assumption, Mr. Simmons, and I think if you'll look, while blacks have fared quite well in high visibility positions in state government, they've not fared so well at the ranks below.
Well, what he asked you was how much better would they do if you were governor?
I think that they would do quite well under me as governor. I would be fair and equitable, and I think that's all that minorities ask for, just the same as other employees.
But once again, there's going to be nothing measurable. No.
Well, I think measurable, you go by percentages. I think you asked a question that was very realistic. When you go by percentage, a ratio of black to white population seems like a good starting point and a fair starting point.
Mr. Clinton.
One of the things I'm proudest of in my administration is the appointment of black Arkansans to non-traditional important positions. I'm the first governor ever to appoint a black to every major board and commission and to increase black participation on the AIDC and on several education boards. I have also appointed a black during my term to run the Department of Finance and Administration, the Department of Human Services, the Department of Health, the state's biggest financial institution, the Development Finance Authority, and several other state agencies. We do have to do a better job of getting blacks into middle-level management positions. That's where the problem is. It was aggravated in the 80s because we had so little turnover there because of the economic adversity that gripped our people. I think in the 90s it will be possible for us to aggressively pursue more middle-level management positions. I should point out that Mr. Nelson's black appointments were made against the backdrop of a civil rights suit that he had to settle, which included cash payments to black employees of ARCLA who'd been discriminated against. And I think if you compare his black appointments in the campaign to mine, you will see that I still have far more participation by black Arkansans.
Do you have a figure?
No, but I think that's a good figure. I've always tried to do at least that much. With qualified people, I agree there should be no quota system exclusive of quality.
Steve Wilkes for Mr. Clinton.
Governor Clinton, Arkansas, like the rest of the nation, faces a relatively bleak outlook in terms of solid waste disposal. Landfills are full or rapidly filling, and opposition to new landfills is very stiff. Would you be willing to mandate recycling through legislation and encourage the manufacture of products using recycled materials through state purchasing, even though those products may cost more than the same product made from non-recycled materials?
The answer to both those questions is yes. In 1989, I signed a bill which established a solid waste task force and which limited the building of new landfills to house out-of-state garbage and restricted existing landfills' intake of out-of-state garbage. That task force is about to issue its report. It will call for restrictions on the things we can put into landfills. I think we have to do that. We have to have statewide recycling. We also need a market, however, for our recycled products. That's why I announced in July a first-of-its-kind agreement with the Arkansas Craft Company in Morrilton to take all the newspapers, corrugated box, and office waste paper we can get there to them to promote solid waste. We may need some special legislation for tough items like tires and batteries, which I expect to offer next time. And I do think the state has to take the lead. I just issued an executive order increasing our participation in recycling, and I will ask the legislature to give us some variance on the purchase price of paper products in particular so that we can take the lead in supporting the purchase of recycled products.
Mr. Nelson.
The answer to both questions is yes for me also. I do think you've got to have a concentrated effort to get a state involved, and I think if private enterprise is not willing to step forward, the state should look at a massive program, including recycling, including incineration, and of course your normal dump sites. I do believe that the state of Arkansas, in order to protect itself for the future, is going to have to take some pretty extensive steps. If we cannot get private enterprise to take up the yoke and carry it for us and pull the load, we as a state are going to have to do it, because it's absolutely a critical issue. County judges, mayors, and others will tell you that it's their most pressing issue right now.
Bill Simmons for Mr. Nelson.
I'd like to find out how each of you stand on the ballot issues that Arkansans will be voting on in 3 weeks. And if you don't mind, I'd just like to take them one by one and ask if you're for or against. Amendment number 1, which would raise your salaries and the salaries of certain other public officials. I believe Mr.
Nelson is the one to answer this.
I am for that amendment, but I can be for it because if I'm elected governor, I will not be taking a salary, so I can back it with impunity.
Amendment 2, the interest rate amendment.
The interest rate amendment I favor. I feel that it's necessary for economic development in the state of Arkansas.
Amendment 3, which would repeal a segregationist provision from the state constitution.
Of course, I favor that. That should have been done many years ago.
Amendment 4, which would establish a lottery.
I am against the lottery. I think it's counterproductive for the state of Arkansas, and I would not favor it.
Initiated Act 1, which is an ethics proposal.
Which, pardon me?
Initiated Act 1, which is an ethics proposal.
I am for that. I think it's absolutely necessary. I have backed it with my time and my money.
And Referred Act, which deals with the establishment of a new bond authority for ADFA.
I'm worried about that one, and I will not take a position yet because it's my understanding they may be trying to bail out some of their bad investments. I would want to look at that. If in fact that is incorrect, I will revise my thinking.
Governor, you want me to walk?
On Initiated Act 1, I believe that the other constitutional officers should be given a raise, but I have taken no position on the amendment and will not, because I'd be personally affected by it.
I believe you mean Amendment 1 rather than Initiated Act 1.
Amendment 1, yes. Amendment 2 is the usury amendment.
Yes.
I support that. I think it will make us competitive for more capital, which is critical, especially to new and small business growth. Amendment 3 is the civil rights repeal.
Yes.
I very much hope that that will pass, and I hope every Arkansan, without regard to party, will vote for it.
Amendment 4, the lottery.
I'm opposed to it.
Act 1, the Ethics Act.
I'm for it.
And the ADFA bonds.
I'm for that. Let me say that the purpose of giving the Development Finance Authority authority to issue up to $25 million worth of general revenue bonds is not to ever use it, but to get us a lower bond rating for our industrial financing for new issues. That bonded indebtedness will never be used, I don't think. We have to go through 4 other hurdles before that would ever be used. We have the land and equipment that's guaranteed. We have the personal guarantees of the people we own money to. And we have lots of other protections that I think can be used. So I would urge the people to vote for that. It will lower interest rates for new industry in Arkansas.
Thank you.
Mr. Clinton, I've been told that that was the last question. We're going to have to go to closing statements at this time. We're running out of time. Mr. Clinton will make the first closing statements.
I want to thank all of you for listening to this debate and those of you who listened to the other one. I want to thank you for giving me the chance to be governor and to tell you I've tried to demonstrate in this campaign that I can work harder, address more issues, and give you the feeling that I care more than my opponent does about the future of this state. I have not solved all the problems of Arkansas in the last 10 years, but contrary to what he says, we have made progress, and we have done it against enormous odds. And you should be proud of the progress that we have made together, because governors don't do much alone. They have to have partners. I ask you in this closing to consider what the real differences between us are. They're mostly in the area of education. He has said that he doesn't think non-college bound students should be required to take the same courses that we now require everybody to take to get out of high school, if they're going to be mechanics or farmers. I think that's a terrible idea. He's criticized our home instruction program for preschool youngsters. I think he's wrong. He's against the college bond program. I think he's wrong. He's changed his position on so many issues just to get votes. And now he criticizes me. Well, let me tell you something. I appointed Sheffield Nelson in 1986 to the AIDC because he promised me he would do the traveling. He'd use his corporate contacts to get us new businesses. He didn't make a single trip after he got me to appoint him with that promise. Instead, he used the opportunity I gave him not to bring jobs to Arkansas, but to make speeches to generate votes. Mr. Nelson has done a lot of things that he doesn't want to talk about, so he criticizes me. I'd just like to ask you to remember when you vote that I've stood up for education, I've stood up for economic development. I believe our state has a good, positive image. I only wish all of our people thought as much of us as so many people outside the state do. We're going to have a good 4 years in the next term, if we maintain our commitment to education and economic development, and if we don't fall for a lot of bogus charges and false promises by someone who increased gas rates a lot more than I ever increased taxes.
Mr. Nelson.
First, I think that we need to compare what Mr. Clinton's for and what I'm against, because I think it shows a real difference between the two of us. Mr. Clinton is for school-based health clinics, and that includes the dispensing of contraceptives, of pregnancy, and abortion counseling. I'm against that. I don't think that it is right for you to have schools to interject themselves between parents and children. Mr. Clinton is for abortion. I am pro-life. Mr. Clinton is for gun control. I am against gun control. Mr. Clinton is for taxes. He has increased taxes more than any governor in history, and if you elect him for 4 more years, you have just seen the beginning. I think that the people of Arkansas deserve to get that load off their back. He wants to run for president. He wants to do what Michael Dukakis did in Massachusetts, and if you give him 4 more years, he'll bring the Massachusetts miracle south. I don't think we, the people of Arkansas, need that. I also think that if you'll look back at my years at AIDC, Mr. Clinton was very proud of me when he got me on that and said that I could do a better job than anybody else he could have named. I think my 3 years out there speak for themselves. They're 3 of the 4 years that he cites as among the best in history. I also would ask you in closing to look at what we've done in our respective careers. I ran ARCLAW like a business. I am a businessman, and I can run state government. I will streamline it, and I'll take the weight of state government off of your back if you'll give me the opportunity. If you elect Bill Clinton, you're doing what he asked you to do in 1988. Elect him to give him 1 more chance to stay in the national limelight. What I want to do is run for governor to be governor, a full-time governor, not one that'll travel 128 days one year, 130 days the next, where you cannot take care of state business in the process. He wants to go out to Washington, D.C., he wants to go out to New York, and he wants to go to Hollywood. I want to stay here in Arkansas and run the state. I thank you. I wish you a good evening. God bless you and good night.
Good evening from Washington. You're